Welcome to the St. Matthew's Episcopal Church podcast, coming to you from Northern Virginia. We're so glad you're here. Today, we hope our message inspires you to better know and share God's love. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast and join our weekly newsletter, The Friday Flash, to stay updated on all of our events and services. Let's dive in.
Good morning. Good morning. So, in the mid-2000s, scary, it's almost 20 years ago, back when I was in college, were the heady days of what's known as the New Atheist Movement. These were a bunch of writers who were intellectuals but decided to start writing for the common audience books with titles like The God Delusion or God is Not Great. The idea being to blame so many of society's ills on religion. They were going on the offensive, not sticking to the ivory tower. And in this swirl of this movement, a friend of mine in college had gotten really into reading them. And we were hanging out with friends at a mall, walking through, and we got paired off and started getting into one of those arguments that can only really be done politely when you're in college. And, arguing about the existence of God. And we argue for a while, and eventually I get sort of frustrated, and I say, what would it take for me to convince you that God exists? Like, what would convince you? And he says, well, if God just came down and did a bunch of miracles and crazy stuff that could only be explained sort of miraculously, then I'd have to believe. To which I responded, well, that's Jesus, right? That's exactly what we believe happened. This guy shows up, does a bunch of miraculous things, literally comes back from the dead, and yet, even back then, and still today, people go, show us the Father, show us God. That's not good enough. We want to see. So I think this conversation that I'm having with my friend is the same one, in essence, that Jesus is having with his disciples. It's the one maybe many of you can relate to. This realization you come to that belief is not just some intellectual move, the result of fancy arguments. My friend didn't not believe because he was just not convinced by my super good reasoning skills. It wasn't an evidentiary problem. It wasn't a problem of reason. It was just that it seemed unbelievable. Unbelievable that God could do the very things, could give the very proof that my friend was asking for. And like I said, I think this is similar to the conversation we see Jesus having with his disciples. So let's set the scene for what's going on. This portion of John's gospel is known to scholars as the farewell discourses. Really, that just means goodbye conversations, right? So the Last Supper has just happened. Jesus has washed his disciples' feet. Judas has awkwardly got up from the dinner table and said, I got to go. And the rest of the disciples were told, think he's going to buy groceries. That's what we're told. So it's kind of suspicious. We know how it ends. So we're like, come on, guys. Where do you think he's going? So Judas has left, and the rest of them are sitting there with Jesus having this conversation. And Jesus begins teaching them that he's going to leave, that he's going somewhere, and he is trying to assure them that things are going to be okay. In fact, we're told multiple times that the disciples are not feeling good about this. They are uneasy about Jesus starting to talk about him leaving. And that's because they believe Jesus is the Messiah. And to them, what that means is the person who is going to reunite Israel, to throw off the yoke of Roman oppression and other oppression, to usher in this great kingdom. And then this person, right, this person who they're counting on, is now informing them that he's going to be leaving shortly. And so you can see the reason for their consternation and the reason why Jesus is at pains to reassure them that things are going to be okay. So in our reading, Jesus tells the disciples, I've been teaching you, you've gotten to know me pretty well, and you know the place where I'm going, and I'll see you there. And Thomas goes, wait, Jesus, we are just now hearing about this. We thought you were going to be around for a while. What do you mean? What do you mean that we know where to go? We don't even know where you're going. And so Jesus responds saying, well, I am the way, the truth, and the life. I'm the way to get where you need to go. We can imagine Jesus saying sort of nonchalantly, so at the very least, you know me, so, you know the way. And then he sort of, as an aside, goes, and you know God now, by the way, since you know me. And now Philip butts in. Wait. We know God? Show us God. Just show us God, and that will be enough. Then we could truly say that we know God. At which point, I imagine Jesus taking a very big sigh before continuing with the conversation. Thomas and Philip's questions aren't too different from my college friends' questions, and they're not too different from ones that many of you may have asked. Asking for God to come down, to give a sign, to prove that he's there, that he's with you. But of course, when we think about it, that wouldn't really convince us, right? Much like my college friend, if God were to come down and do some fancy fireworks show in the sky, surely someone would say, well, but there could be an explanation for that, so I'm just going to wait. I'm going to wait until there's one little extra tidbit of proof. I'm going to wait till I really know for sure. Looking at this passage, John Calvin, the great reformer John Calvin, wrote that we claim to be earnest in seeking God, but when he presents before our eyes, we are blind. And St. Augustine is more specific, saying that if one who is equal to the Father was not enough for the disciples, how would the Father have possibly been enough? And maybe you relate to this. Like I said, maybe you've asked God for a sign, or maybe you've descended to haggling, right? God, if only this thing gets done, I'll go to church, I'll jump into my faith life, I'll really, really commit myself, if only X. Maybe some of you relate to this very same thinking that the disciples have. Or maybe another option is that you've decided to stay in this sort of maybe pseudo-intellectual agnosticism, like my friend, this, I'm just going to wait. I'm going to wait until I get one more little bit of evidence. I'm not going to commit. I'm going to keep my options open. That sort of midway point in your faith life. Maybe that's where you're sitting today. And so that's why I think, because this is so close to what the disciples were feeling at this time, it's important to look at what Jesus responds to them, or how Jesus responds to them. But first, a story. And it's a rock climbing story. And yes, you're going to have to suffer through so many more of these. But it's a good analogy. Rock climbing taught me that belief is a little bit of a funny thing, right? So this probably won't surprise many of you, but when I got into it 6 or 7 years ago, I was like, I'm going to really get into it. Like, I'm going to do all the research. I'm going to read all the books. I'm one of those people where I can sort of suppress my own fears and anxieties by just finding out a lot about something, right? Like, airplanes are far less scary if you actually know how an airplane works, right? And it's sort of like that. I wanted to exercise some control over the situation. And so I studied all the safety systems. I learned how they worked. I learned that climbing ropes are what are called kermantle ropes. That means that they're hundreds of nylon, very strong nylon strings running through the middle of the rope that are then wrapped in a protective sheath of yet more rope. Climbing ropes my friend says they could hold a truck upside down, right? They are really, really strong. They don't break, right? Absent you taking a knife to them, they just don't cut. And yet, when I set off on any climb outdoors, as I start ascending, there's always that thought that today could be the day that the freak accident happens, right? I could be the first. So and clearly I believe the rope will hold me, right? I've tied myself in, I've done all the work, and I've started climbing. But do I really believe? Like, not really. There's the jitters, right? This fear that's just lingering in the background. But you know what really does get rid of all that fear? Is falling. Yes, counterintuitively, that the best way to get rid of all that fear is often to take what we call a whipper, a really big fall. Right? And what happens is you fall, and all the safety gear holds, and then the fear just melts out of you, right? Like, you're like, oh, it worked. And the rest of the climb, you could take that fall at like 20 feet up, and then you could climb like 300 feet and be like, I'm not afraid anymore. There's something about that first fall, and climbers know this. They call it a practice fall. On their first climb of the day, they will often get to, maybe even the top. If they're just doing a short climb, they'll get to like 45 feet up, and they won't clip in at the final clip. They'll just take the fall 10 feet, 15 feet on that last to the next clip, thinking to themselves, well, I need to get it out of my system. And once it is, they can trust the rope. And I think what Jesus is saying to the disciples here is similar to that. So let's go back to the conversation. He's exasperated. They keep asking him for something more, some more proof. And then he says to them, "The Father who dwells in me does his works. Believe me that I'm in the Father and the Father is in me. But if you do not believe, then believe because of the works themselves." In other words, what Jesus seems to be saying is that you should believe, you should follow the argument, you should follow Jesus and what he's said. But if you can't, look at what he's done. Look at what others do when they follow Jesus. That's the thing that's going to convince you to take a fall. Does it work? Watch it work. Watch it transform your life. Maybe watch the way that it's transformed someone else's life. And if you see these works that are like Jesus, then you'll know Jesus. And if you know and believe Jesus, you know and trust Jesus, then you'll know and believe God. Once you see my work, Jesus seems to be saying, then you can trust it will all work out. The great reformer Martin Luther, 500 years ago in the Larger Catechism, wrote the following question and answer discussion. The question is, what does it mean to have a God? And his response was, a God means that from which we expect all good and to which we are to take refuge. So that to have a God is nothing less than to trust and believe. It's that upon which you set your heart and put your trust that is properly your God. And I realize now what I should have responded to my college atheist friend is not, sort of like, what would it take? And this sort of frustrated exasperation. I should have responded with well, what do you believe? Like, what's the thing upon which you build your life? What is the thing that helps you set your priorities, that tells you what matters to you, your ultimate values, or even tells you what it means to fulfill those values? What does it mean to love for you? What does love look like? Because the fact is that we can maintain these sort of intellectual agnostic positions in theory, but in life, we have to live. We have to make decisions. We have to do something. And at that point, the thing that we worship, the thing that we call our God, becomes obvious. What Jesus is saying to the disciples here is, look at me and look at what I've done. And it's fine to have some doubt, some uncertainty, but when you have to decide how to live your life or what it means for your life to have meaning, follow me. Look at how I've lived and see how it works. It's almost like he's saying, try it on. Do it. Like, act as if you really believe and see if you do. See if it works. See if it works in other people's lives. Have a virtuous exemplar, someone who you are certain has a good relationship with God, and do what they do. Don't just sit back and just wait for some sort of intellectual conversion, but actually do the thing. Belief, Jesus is saying, is just the first step. True belief is something you can act on. It means you're willing to trust the system, to trust the rope, to take the fall. It means you're willing to go beyond bare intellectual belief. So Jesus said, believe me that I'm in the Father and the Father is in me. But if you do not, then believe because of the works themselves. Amen, I tell you, the one who believes in me will also do the works that I do. Amen.
Thank you for listening. If you're in the Northern Virginia area, we invite you to join us for worship or any of our events. For directions, service times, and information about our online services, visit stmtts.org. That's stmtts.org. Until next time, go in peace and share God's love.